George Anderson was a 72-year-old man who lived in a quiet little town just outside Dallas, Texas. If you were to ask anyone in the neighborhood about George, you'd hear the same thing every time. That old guy who's always cracking jokes and throwing backyard BBQs. George was a character, a storyteller, a former mechanic, and above all, someone who never quite realized how old he was getting. His house sat at the end of a street lined with tall oak trees where the birds sang every morning and the smell of fresh-cut grass lingered through the day. George had lived there for over 40 years, raising his 2 daughters, with his late wife, Martha. Since Martha passed away 8 years ago, the house had grown quieter. But George never let that sadness settle in for too long. He kept himself busy, filling his days with hobbies, friends, and the occasional misadventure. George had a dog named Buddy, a scruffy golden retriever with too much energy for a man George's age, but exactly the kind of companion he needed. Buddy wasn't just a pet, he was family. George talked to him more than he did to most people, often narrating his daily routines, sharing memories, and even complaining about politics to the furry listener who would wag his tail in response. Every morning, George had a routine. He'd wake up at 6:30, shuffle into the kitchen in his plaid slippers, and brew a strong cup of black coffee. "Nothing fancy," he'd say, "just the kind of coffee that could wake up a dead battery." After that, it was out to the backyard with Buddy, where George would inspect his vegetable garden. A patch of tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and one stubborn watermelon vine that never quite produced anything worth bragging about. George had a reputation for his weekend BBQs. Every Saturday, he fired up his old dented grill, and neighbors would wander over with cold drinks, pies, and stories to share. George loved those afternoons. They made him feel like he was still young, still part of something lively. He'd crack jokes about getting old, saying things like, "I may be 72, but my appetite's 25, and my jokes are stuck at 12. But lately, something had been bothering him. George had started waking up with a stiff, aching feeling in his lower back. At first, he blamed it on his old recliner, the same one he'd had since the 80s, or on Buddy taking up too much space on the bed. "You're hogging my half, you 4-legged freeloader," he'd grumble, while Buddy would wag his tail, oblivious. The aches weren't new. George had spent decades as a mechanic, bending, lifting, crawling under cars, and handling heavy engine parts. His body had seen wear and tear, but he always prided himself on being tough. "I once carried a V8 engine block across the shop floor," he'd boast. "A little backache isn't going to take me down." Still, this felt different. It wasn't just the occasional soreness after a long day. It was stiff mornings, sharp twinges when he bent down to pick up a dropped wrench or toss Buddy's ball. The ache lingered even after his coffee, even after stretching or lying down. He joked about it to his daughter Laura, telling her that Buddy had secretly conspired against him by hogging all the good spots on the mattress. George's stubbornness was as much a part of his identity as his love for BBQ. The idea of seeing a doctor, out of the question. "Doctors'll just tell me what I already know," he'd say, puffing out his chest. "I'm old. Things hurt. That's just how it is." But if he was honest with himself, something he rarely liked to be, the discomfort was starting to affect his days. He noticed he wasn't moving as quickly. He hesitated before lifting things, even light ones like a watering can. It took him longer to get up from his favorite chair, and sometimes he'd catch himself standing there, waiting for the pain to ease before taking the next step. Buddy, as loyal as ever, seemed to sense something was wrong. The dog would nudge George's leg gently when he saw him grimace or stay closer than usual during their walks. Laura noticed it too. She pointed out one day that George was walking a little hunched over. "Dad," she said, "you're not as spry as you used to be." "Spry?" George chuckled. "Sweetheart, I haven't been spry since Reagan was president." Despite his jokes, there was a quiet worry in the back of George's mind. He remembered stories from some of the older guys at the senior center about back surgeries, sciatica, and days spent stuck in bed. He didn't want to be one of those stories, but he also didn't want to admit that maybe he was heading in that direction. He kept making excuses. Maybe it was the weather. Texas was known for those unpredictable pressure changes. Maybe it was the old mattress, or the cold tile floors, or too many hours sitting in his garage tinkering with Buddy's chewed-up toys. One morning, the pain hit differently. He reached for his coffee mug, and a sharp, burning jolt shot down his lower back, making him wince so hard that he nearly dropped the cup. Buddy barked, as if alarmed by his reaction. George sat down carefully, placing the mug on the table with a shaky hand. "Well, this ain't good," he muttered. "Looks like your old man's starting to rust, Buddy." That evening, Laura and her husband, Mike, came by for dinner. As soon as Laura saw her father move, she knew something was wrong. "Dad, you've been limping. What's going on?" George tried to brush it off, mumbling about the garden, the weather, and Buddy pulling on the leash too hard, but Laura wasn't buying it. "You need to see a doctor, Dad. This isn't normal." "I'm fine," George insisted. "I just need a couple of aspirin and a good night's sleep." But the truth was, George was scared, not just of the pain, but of what it might mean. Losing his independence, giving up his BBQ weekends, needing help with simple things like mowing the lawn. Those were thoughts he didn't want to entertain. In the back of his mind, though, George knew he couldn't ignore it forever. For now, he made a deal with himself. One more week. If it didn't get better, maybe, just maybe, he'd see a doctor. And with that promise hanging in the air, George finished his coffee, rubbed Buddy's head, and told him, "Looks like we've got ourselves a little adventure coming up, Buddy boy." The sun was setting over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across George's yard. It was the kind of evening that made everything look peaceful, even if George's back was far from it. And in that moment, as Buddy chased a squirrel and Laura cleaned up the dishes inside, George smiled, because deep down, he still believed he could outrun time. As the evening wore on, George settled into his favorite recliner, the same old, brown leather chair that had more creaks and cracks than a haunted house. It was molded to his shape after years of loyal service, a faithful throne for watching baseball games and classic Western movies. Buddy lay at his feet, occasionally twitching in his sleep, probably dreaming of chasing rabbits. George reached for the TV remote with a slight grunt. Even small movements were getting tougher. He flicked through the channels, stopping on an old Clint Eastwood film. "Now there's a man who never let a little backache slow him down," George muttered, adjusting the pillow behind him. But even Clint couldn't distract him tonight. His mind kept circling back to Laura's words. "You need to see a doctor." "Dad!" It wasn't the first time she'd said it, and it probably wouldn't be the last. George knew his daughter worried about him, especially since Martha had passed. Laura had always been the sensitive one. She had a knack for noticing the things people tried to hide. George sighed, feeling a mix of pride and stubbornness. He didn't want to be a burden. In his day, men didn't complain about pain. They powered through it, slapped on a patch or downed a shot of whiskey. But times were different now, and he had to admit maybe ignoring things wasn't working like it used to. The movie credits rolled, and the house grew quiet. George turned off the TV, leaving just the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the tick-tick-tick of the clock on the wall. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and a cool breeze made the tree branches sway. George looked down at Buddy, still sound asleep. "Well, partner," he whispered, "looks like I might have to face the music." He shifted in the chair, groaning slightly as he stood. His back protested, sharp and stubborn. Slowly, he made his way to the bedroom. Each step felt heavier, and by the time he reached the bed, he was exhausted in a way that was more than physical. Lying in bed, George stared at the ceiling fan as it turned lazily above him. His mind wandered back to his old mechanic shop. He thought about the long hours, the greasy engines, and the pride he felt fixing things with his own 2 hands. That work had defined him. But maybe, just maybe, it had also worn him down. He thought of old Joe Ramsey, a friend from the senior center who'd ignored his back pain for too long. Joe ended up needing surgery and months of physical therapy. George remembered visiting him in the hospital, seeing him pale and weak, hooked up to machines. That wasn't the life George wanted, but then again, was a doctor visit really the end of the world? Laura wasn't asking him to give up his independence, just to check things out. Maybe get some advice. Maybe it was something simple. Tomorrow, George murmured to himself, I'll call Dr. Simmons. No promises after that, though. Satisfied with this tiny, reluctant concession, George pulled the blanket up to his chest. Buddy stirred and hopped onto the bed, curling up next to him like he always did. Good boy, George said softly, giving Buddy's ear a gentle rub. He closed his eyes and let the hum of the ceiling fan lull him towards sleep. The aches and worries were still there, but for now, in the quiet dark, they felt just a little farther away. And somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird sang its nighttime song, as if reminding George that tomorrow was a new day, one worth getting up for, no matter how much your back hurt. The next morning, George woke up earlier than usual, partly because Buddy was licking his face, and partly because his back sent a sharp reminder that it was still unhappy with him. He groaned, stretched a little, and muttered, I swear, Buddy, if you could drive, I'd have you take me to the doctor yourself. Buddy wagged his tail as if agreeing. After a slow shuffle to the kitchen, George made his coffee and looked at the phone sitting on the counter. It seemed to glare back at him. He knew what he'd promised himself last night, but the idea of actually calling Dr. Simmons made his stomach twist. George hadn't seen a doctor in over 3 years. Not since his last checkup, when Simmons told him to cut back on red meat. George had ignored that advice, of course. A man can live without a lot of things, he'd said, but not brisket. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, staring out at the backyard. The watermelon vine was still looking miserable. Buddy was chasing a butterfly, and the wind made the wind chimes jingle softly. It should have been a peaceful morning, but George couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to lose a battle with his own pride. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed the number. Good morning, Simmons Family Clinic. This is Cheryl speaking. George cleared his throat. Yeah. This is George Anderson. I need to make an appointment. Well, good morning, Mr. Anderson. Cheryl's voice was bright, maybe a little too cheerful for this early in the day. What can we do for you? George hesitated. It's my back. Been acting up. Cheryl paused for a moment, her voice softening. I'm sorry to hear that. Let's get you in to see Dr. Simmons. How about tomorrow at 10 a.m.? George wanted to say no, to suggest maybe next week, or better yet, never. But Buddy let out a sharp bark and George took it as a sign. Yeah, okay, tomorrow's fine. After hanging up, George sighed. He felt like he'd just agreed to get a tooth pulled. But deep down, there was also a sense of relief. At least. Now something was happening. He spent the rest of the morning puttering around the garage, trying to avoid thinking about the appointment. He reorganized his tool chest, which meant moving a few wrenches around, then giving up because bending down hurt too much. He and Buddy took a short walk around the block, which left George more winded than it should have. As he sat on the porch, a familiar voice called out, Morning, George. It was Walter Jennings, George's neighbor and longtime friend. Walter was 75, with a thick head of white hair and a belly that looked like it had been built one cheeseburger at a time. He ambled over, carrying a plastic bag with 2 donuts. I brought provisions, Walter grinned, holding up the bag like a trophy. George laughed. What, no coffee? I figured you had that covered, Walter said, sitting down beside him. So, what's new, old man? George hesitated for a second, then decided to tell him. Made a doctor's appointment for my back, Walter. Raised an eyebrow. Well, I'll be. George Anderson voluntarily seeing a doctor? Is the world ending? Don't start, George grumbled, though a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'm proud of you, buddy, Walter said. I know how stubborn you are. I ain't stubborn, George shot back. I just don't like people poking and prodding me. Walter laughed, taking a bite of his donut. Yeah, well, sometimes you gotta let 'em. I've had sciatica for years now. Thought it was just old age, but turns out there's stuff they can do about it. I'm still here, aren't I? George leaned back, thinking. What did they do for you? Physical therapy, Walter said. Stretches, light, exercises, some fancy heating pads. I thought it was nonsense at first, but it helped. And Simmons is a good doc. He won't steer you wrong. George mulled it over while chewing on his donut. He wasn't ready to admit it, but Walter made sense. That night, George had trouble sleeping again. Every time he rolled over, his back complained. The ache wasn't unbearable, but it was constant, like an annoying background hum you couldn't turn off. He thought about Walter's words, about sciatica and treatments. He realized how little he actually knew about back pain. He'd just assumed it was part of getting old. Lying there in the dark, he made another promise to himself. If Simmons suggested something, he'd at least listen. The next morning came too quickly. George got dressed carefully, choosing his cleanest, flannel shirt and a pair of jeans that didn't require too much bending to put on. Buddy whined when George grabbed his keys. You stay here, boy, George said, giving him a pat. This is a solo mission. The drive to the clinic was short, but George felt like he was headed to court for a sentencing. He parked, took a deep breath, and walked in. Cheryl greeted him with a warm smile. Good to see you, Mr. Anderson. Go ahead and have a seat. Dr. Simmons will be right with you. George sat in the waiting room, surrounded by posters about heart health, flu shots, and signs of stroke. He glanced at a magazine, then put it down. Too many articles about diets and joint pain. After what felt like an eternity, Cheryl called his name. Right this way. George followed her down the hall to the exam room, where he waited another few minutes before Dr. Simmons came in. Simmons was in his mid-50s, tall and trim, with a calm, steady demeanor. George liked him, even if he rarely admitted it. Well, George, Simmons said, pulling up a stool, it's been a while. Yeah, I know, George grumbled. Figured I'd better stop in before my warranty runs out. Simmons chuckled. What's going on? George explained about the back pain, how it started, how it had gotten worse, the sharp jolt when he reached for his coffee mug. He left out a few of the jokes this time, focusing more on the facts. Simmons listened carefully, then did a quick examination. He had George bend, twist, and walk across the room. None of it was comfortable. Well, Simmons said, I'm glad you came in. It sounds like you're dealing with a combination of lower back strain and likely some mild sciatica, possibly age-related degenerative disc issues. It's pretty common for men your age, especially with your background as a mechanic, George frowned. So what now? Surgery? Pills? Not necessarily, Simmons said. Most back pain in older adults can be managed without surgery. I'd like to start with physical therapy. They'll teach you stretches and exercises to strengthen the muscles around your spine. Also, heat therapy, anti-inflammatory medication if needed, and posture adjustments. George snorted. Posture? I'm 72. My posture is whatever it wants to be. Simmons grinned. You'd be surprised what a little adjustment can do. George sighed. All right. I'll give it a shot. But if they make me do yoga, I'm out. No yoga, Simmons promised. Just simple stuff. You'll feel better, George. Walking out of the clinic, George felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because he finally had a plan. For the first time in weeks, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't at war with his own body. Buddy greeted him at the door, tail wagging furiously. Well, boy, George said, bending down with a little less hesitation. Looks like we're not headed for the scrapyard just yet. The following week, George found himself standing awkwardly inside Clear Path Physical Therapy, a small but modern-looking clinic on the corner of Main Street. It smelled like hand sanitizer and new gym mats, a scent George would never have associated with anything resembling comfort. He adjusted his flannel shirt and glanced around, taking in the exercise machines, colorful resistance bands hanging like oversized spaghetti noodles, and a wall-mounted poster of a smiling senior couple doing stretches. "Yeah, right," George muttered to himself, eyeing the poster. "Looked like they've never changed a flat tire in their lives." Buddy wasn't with him this time. George figured a howling beagle wasn't ideal for a first therapy session, but deep down, he missed the little guy's company. "Mr. Anderson?" a cheerful voice called. George turned to see a woman in her early 30s, wearing a navy polo shirt with the clinic's logo. She was petite with short brown hair and a warm, no-nonsense face. "I'm Olivia," she said, offering her hand. "I'll be your physical therapist." George shook it, his grip a little stiff. "You sure? You're up for it?" "I ain't exactly light work," Olivia grinned. "Don't worry, George. I've handled stubborn old mechanics before. You'd be surprised." That got a chuckle out of him. "All right. Fair enough." She led him to a padded table, motioning for him to sit down. "So tell me what's been going on." George explained the back pain again, this time adding more about the stiff mornings, the twinges while walking Buddy, and the coffee mug incident. Olivia listened carefully, jotting notes on a tablet. "Well," she said thoughtfully, "sounds like you've got a mix of lower back strain, some stiffness in your hips, and likely a touch of sciatica. That little jolt down your leg. Classic sign," George sighed. "That what happens when you hit 72? Olivia smiled. "It's common, yes, but the good news is we can do something about it. Aging changes our bodies, but it doesn't mean you have to be stuck in pain. Think of it like working on a car. The older models need a little more maintenance." George raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, parts are harder to find too." "That's true," Olivia laughed, "but let's see what you've still got in stock." She guided George through a few simple movements, raising one leg, bending gently, turning his torso. George groaned a little but followed instructions. "Your muscles are tighter than my dad's old pickup truck door," Olivia commented with a grin. "But nothing's broken. We're going to loosen you up, strengthen your core, and teach those muscles to support your back better." George looked skeptical. "Strengthen? Lady, I ain't done a sit-up since Nixon was in office." "No sit-ups," Olivia promised. "We'll start with simple, back-friendly exercises, stretching, light movements, breathing techniques, little by little. The goal isn't to turn you into a gymnast. It's to make your daily life easier." George sat back, considering. "I can live with that." She began by showing him pelvic tilts, a movement George found ridiculously simple, but surprisingly challenging when his back tensed up. "Like this," Olivia demonstrated, lying on the table, flattening her back gently against the mat. George copied her, grunting a little. "Feels like I'm trying to iron a shirt with my back." "That's actually a good way to think of it," Olivia said, laughing. "Flatten and release. No rush." They moved on to knee-to-chest stretches, ankle pumps, and a seated hamstring stretch using a towel. By the end of the session, George was sweating lightly and feeling parts of his body he hadn't noticed. In years, it wasn't pain exactly, more like a dull, warm ache that told him something was waking up. "Well," he said, standing slowly, "guess I'll be sore tomorrow." "Maybe a little," Olivia admitted. "But a good sore, and we'll build up from here." She handed him a printed sheet of exercises to do at home. A buddy would have to supervise. Before leaving, George paused. "Hey, appreciate you not treating me like I'm made of glass," Olivia smiled. "Trust me, George, I know tough when I see it." On the drive home, George's mind wandered. He realized how little he truly understood about what was happening in his back. It was easy to blame age, but was it just age? Or something more? Well, according to Dr. Simmons's brochure and what Olivia hinted at, There's a very scientific explanation behind why older adults often experience back pain. As we age, several things happen. The discs in our spine lose water content and shrink, reducing cushioning between vertebrae. Muscles supporting the back and abdomen weaken, partly from inactivity, partly from age-related loss of muscle mass, called sarcopenia. Joint wear and tear, osteoarthritis, can cause stiffness and limit. Movement, posture naturally changes over time, especially if lifelong habits favored slouching or heavy lifting. What makes it tricky is that these changes don't always cause pain right away. But when mobility decreases, flexibility fades, and muscles tighten, the body starts sending signals, those dull aches, sharp twinges, and stiff mornings. The good news? As Olivia said, movement matters. Modern studies support this too. A 2022 review in the Journal of Geriatric Physical Therapy confirmed that low-impact, targeted exercises improve mobility, reduce pain, and even decrease fall risk in older adults with chronic back issues. Another 2021 study in Spine Journal found that core strengthening and posture training programs led to long-term improvements in both function and pain for seniors. In other words, it wasn't just part of getting old. It was something George could actually work on, and George liked the sound of that. That evening, George sat down with Buddy, ice pack on his lower back, while watching an old western. He chuckled to himself. "Well, boy, I survived." Buddy wagged his tail, as if to say, "I told you so." George picked up the printout of exercises. "Look at this. Pelvic tilts, knee pulls, ankle pumps. Who knew my golden years would involve more stretching than my high school football days?" He glanced over at Buddy. "You know what, though? Feels kinda good, like I'm fixing up an old truck." "Me," Buddy barked softly. "You think I'll still be able to chase squirrels by summer?" George asked. Buddy gave a hopeful whine. George sighed, leaning back. "Well, one way to find out." He made a mental note to keep going, to not give up just because it was uncomfortable or because he was 72. If a beagle could run like he was still 2 years old, maybe George could learn to move a little better too. Tomorrow's plan. Another round of those silly stretches, a short walk around the block, and maybe less brisket. Well, maybe. It had been about 3 weeks since George started his physical therapy routine, and against his better judgment, he was beginning to feel better. Sure, he wasn't doing cartwheels down Main Street, but getting out of bed wasn't a battlefield anymore, and walking Buddy felt less like dragging a bag of cement tied to his spine. He still grumbled, still cracked jokes about how everything north of his knees ached, but there was a spark of something new underneath, hope, and nothing stirred up George's spirits quite like Tanner's Diner, the little coffee shop he'd been visiting every Thursday morning for years. The place hadn't changed since the late 70s. It still had faded red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner that played Elvis if you hit it just right, and a waitress named Mabel who called everybody Hun. "Morning, boys," George greeted as he shuffled into his usual booth. "Look who's walking straight for a change," joked Stanley, a wiry man with a shock of white hair and a baseball cap that said, "Number 1 Grandpa." "Must have swapped out his rusty parts," added Leonard, who was round, jolly, and could recite every episode of Bonanza by heart. George slid in next to them with a grunt. "Still rusty, fellas, just a little less squeaky." Mabel appeared like clockwork, coffee pot in hand. "The usual, George?" "You bet." "And maybe a side of victory pie," George winked. "What's that?" "Any pie you got. I survived physical therapy." The table erupted in laughter. As the guys dug into their breakfasts, eggs, bacon, toast, the conversation drifted to something George had been thinking about all week. "You ever notice," George started, "how we used to move around? And more, as kids, Heck, even in our 40s. Stanley nodded, buttering his toast. Course we did. We worked harder, played harder. I remember hauling hay bales like they were nothing, Leonard chimed in. I built a whole deck myself at 50. Now I get winded looking for my TV remote. They all laughed, but the truth stung a little. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was science. As George had learned from Olivia, movement declines naturally with age. Not just because people get tired or lazy, but because pain and fear creep in. A stiff back makes you avoid bending. Sore knees discourage walks. Fear of falling keeps you on the couch. But here's the kicker. The less you move, the worse it gets. A study from the Journal of Aging and Physical Activity 2020 found that older adults who reduced their physical activity due to pain or fear experienced a 36% faster decline in mobility and strength compared to those who stayed active, even with mild discomfort. It's a vicious cycle. Pain leads to inactivity. Inactivity leads to stiffness and weakness. Stiffness and weakness lead to more pain. Repeat. Olivia called it the sitting spiral, and George realized he'd been stuck in it for years. As if on cue, Stanley set down his coffee cup and groaned, rubbing his lower back. Dang, lumbago's killing me, he muttered. What's lumbago? George teased. Fancy word for old man back, Leonard quipped. I'm serious. Stanley winced. Gets me every morning. I can barely straighten up until I soak in a hot bath. George leaned in, suddenly feeling like Olivia himself. You doing anything about it, Stan? Like what? Doctor just gave me pills. I don't want to get hooked on those. I started therapy, George said. Nothing crazy. Little stretches. Breathing tricks. Helps more than I thought. Stanley looked skeptical. Ain't it just lying on a mat and paying someone to tell you what hurts? George chuckled. Kinda. But it works. Olivia, my therapist, says most back pain in folks our age isn't because we're broken. It's because we've stopped moving the way we should. It's like letting a classic car sit in the garage too long. Leonard perked up. What? A kind of exercises? George demonstrated a seated pelvic tilt right there in the booth, causing the vinyl seat to squeak. Mabel gave him a sideways glance. Everything all right over there, hun? Just working on my classic chassis, George grinned. The truth is, you don't need to run marathons or do yoga headstands to fix your back. What George was learning and now sharing is that simple, consistent movement makes the biggest difference. Here's what Olivia had George start with. Pelvic tilts, lying down or sitting, gently rocking the pelvis to flatten the back. Knee to chest. Stretch, one leg at a time, holding the stretch for 10 seconds. Ankle pumps, moving the feet up and down to improve circulation. Seated forward. Bends, gently reaching towards the toes while sitting. Breathing exercises. Deep belly breathing to relax. The spine muscles. Modern research supports these too. A 2021 paper in the Annals of Internal Medicine showed that low-impact movement routines reduce chronic back pain intensity by up to 50% in older adults when done regularly. Key takeaway: motion is lotion. George loved that phrase. It made him laugh every time Olivia said it. But it made sense. Keeping the joints, muscles, and spine moving prevented them from drying out, stiffening, and locking up. Even Leonard, who swore he hadn't stretched since the Eisenhower administration, tried an ankle pump under the table. Hey, Leonard grinned. That feels kinda good. Later that afternoon, George took Buddy for a stroll around the block. The sun was warm, the air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass, and Buddy darted after every squirrel-shaped shadow. George felt, well, alive. Sure, his back still grumbled, but now it was a manageable grumble, a background noise, not a full-blown siren. He paused by the park bench where he used to sit when things got too tough. Today he walked past it. Come on, Buddy, he said, tightening the leash. We're not done yet. Buddy's tail wagged like a metronome. George knew there'd be bad days. He knew the pain would come and go, but now he had a plan, a rhythm, a way to fight back that didn't involve more pills or giving up, and maybe, just maybe, a few more guys from the diner would join him. It happened on a crisp Friday morning. George had just finished his morning stretches. Buddy, as usual, was already bouncing by the door, leash in his mouth. The sun was peeking through the blinds, the kind of perfect early autumn day that made George think maybe, just maybe, getting older wasn't all bad. Then the phone rang. "George, it's Mabel," said the voice on the other end. "It's Stanley. He fell." George's stomach dropped. "What happened?" He was getting out of his truck at the grocery store, lost his balance, slipped right on the curb. Ambulance. Took him to St. Mary's. George hung up without finishing his coffee. At the hospital, Stanley was propped up in bed, a sheepish grin on his face and a purple, swollen ankle. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Stanley joked, though his eyes looked a little glassier than usual. George chuckled. "Heard you. Tried out for the Flying Wallendas. I'm too old to be airborne, pal." Beneath the humor, George could see it. Fear. Stanley had always been the tough guy of the group, the one who refused to use a cane, who laughed at TV commercials for stair lifts. But now, with his ankle propped on pillows and a heart monitor beeping steadily, he looked small, vulnerable. And George understood, because every older adult knew one bad fall could change everything. George remembered something Olivia told him during therapy. "George," she'd said, "falls are the leading cause of injury-related deaths among older adults in the US. At the time, George had shrugged it off. He wasn't frail, he wasn't reckless. But Stanley wasn't either, and here he was. The statistics backed it up. According to the CDC, 1 out of 4 Americans aged 65 and older falls each year, every 11 seconds. An older adult is treated in the emergency room for a fall. Every 19 minutes, an older adult dies from a fall. Most falls aren't from daredevil stunts or icy sidewalks. They happen in familiar, everyday places. The kitchen, bathroom, front steps. George thought about how many times he'd caught himself wobbling after, missing a step or reaching too far for the TV remote. He didn't like it, but it was the truth. "So what did the doc say?" George asked. Stanley sighed. "Sprained my ankle good. Gotta keep off it a few weeks. They want me to use a walker." "A walker?" George raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. Can you believe it? Me. I told them I'd rather crawl." George laughed. "Stan, nobody's too proud to stay upright." Stanley groaned, rubbing his face. "I guess I got cocky. I stopped doing those exercises you talked about. Figured it was just old man fluff." George nodded. "It ain't fluff, it's fuel. You stop moving, you start tipping over." Stanley grumbled something about stubborn doctors, but George could see the lesson had landed. Later that evening, George sat on his porch, Buddy snoozing at his feet. He made a mental list, things Olivia had taught him, things he'd ignored, and things he was going to nag Stanley about the minute he got out of that hospital bed. "Light it up. Most falls happen at night, or in dim areas," Olivia recommended. "Motion sensor lights in hallways, bathrooms and stairs." George installed one by his bedroom door. Buddy barked at it for a week, but now it was second nature. Clear the clutter, no loose rugs, electrical cords or shoes in walking paths. George tripped on Buddy's chew toy just last month and knew it was no joke. Support your balance. Simple. Balance exercises like standing on one foot while holding a chair or walking heel to toe. Olivia called them cheap insurance policies. 4. Check your meds. Some medications cause dizziness or drowsiness. George had a heart-to-heart with his doc last year to adjust the ones that made him feel foggy. Keep moving. Regular walking, stretching, and strength exercises reduced fall risk by 30–50%, according to a 2022 JAMA Network study. Use what you need: canes, walkers, grab bars in bathrooms. They weren't signs of weakness. They were tools. Olivia told him, "A cane is like a third leg, not a white flag." George wasn't a safety nut, but he'd seen too many folks ignore this stuff until it was too late. A week later, George swung by Stanley's place. To his surprise, Stanley was sitting out front, leaning on a shiny new walker, decorated with a custom cup holder and a little American flag. "Well, if it isn't Speed Racer," George teased. Stanley smirked. "Don't get used to it. Doctor says it's temporary. How's the ankle?" "Sore, but I'm moving. Olivia's got me doing ankle rolls and hip wiggles or something." George chuckled. "Those hip wiggles will keep you out of the ER." Stanley leaned in. "You were right, pal. It ain't about being tough. It's about sticking around for the good stuff." They sat there for a while watching Buddy chase a butterfly. The kind of lazy afternoon older men pretend not to appreciate but secretly treasure. As the sun dipped lower, George thought about how things had changed, and how, in a strange way, Stanley's fall had been good for all of them. The guys at Tanner's Diner started swapping stories about their own near misses. Leonard confessed he once fell while changing a light bulb. Mabel admitted she'd slipped on spilled coffee behind the counter. It opened up conversations no one wanted to have, but everyone needed. George made a promise to himself. Never skip the stretches. Keep Buddy's toys out of the hallway. Help his friends stay upright, literally and emotionally. He raised his coffee cup. "To the falls that wake us up." Stanley clinked his plastic water bottle against it. "To sticking around." Buddy barked like he agreed. If there was one person in Willow Creek who could out-talk George, it was Doris Miller. Doris was 72, a widow and a retired school librarian. She had curly white hair, a voice like warm syrup, and a habit of wearing bright floral dresses that made her look like a walking spring garden. She also had a problem no one really talked about: insomnia. George first met Doris at the Tanner's Diner one morning when she ordered a cup of black coffee, and then another, and then a third. "Late night?" George asked, raising an eyebrow. Doris smiled. "You could say that. I haven't slept through the night since the Reagan administration." George laughed, but something about the way Doris said it made him pause. "Seriously?" "Oh, honey," she sighed. "Some people count sheep. I've named whole flocks." That was how George learned about the quiet epidemic no one mentioned at the diner. Later that day, George asked Olivia about it during his therapy session. "Is that normal?" he asked. "For older folks to stop sleeping?" Olivia nodded. "Very common. In fact, about 50% of adults over 65 report some kind of sleep disturbance." She explained how aging affects the circadian rhythm, the internal clock that controls sleep and wake cycles. Older adults tend to get sleepy earlier in the evening, wake up earlier in the morning, sleep lighter with more awakenings throughout the night. Plus, conditions like arthritis, back pain, heart issues, medications, and even anxiety could wreak havoc on a good night's rest. "It's not just about tiredness," Olivia added. "Poor sleep increases risks for falls, memory problems, depression, even heart disease." George thought about Stanley and his fall. Was poor sleep part of the problem? Doris, it turned out, had her own nightly routine. "I usually fall asleep around 9, she told George one afternoon while watering her flowers. "Then I wake up at 1:30, wide awake, like clockwork." What did she do? "Oh, I read. Watch old westerns, rearrange my kitchen cabinets. I've alphabetized my spice rack 3 times this week." George chuckled. "That's not insomnia, that's productivity." Doris grinned. "Honey, it's survival." But she admitted it. "Wasn't fun. I'm cranky, my eyes burn. I nod off in church and I forget things, like where I put my car keys or whether I fed Mr. Whiskers." She lowered her voice. "Last week I poured orange juice in my coffee." Doris's doctor had suggested cutting back on caffeine after noon, avoiding naps longer than 20 minutes, keeping a regular sleep schedule, limiting screen time at night, light evening exercise like stretching or gentle walks. "Oh, I tried that." Doris waved it off. "I even did yoga once, almost broke a hip trying to touch my toes." George laughed, but deep down he knew it wasn't funny. The National Institute on Aging recommends older adults aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. Chronic sleep deprivation could lead to increased fall risk, poor immune function, depression, and irritability, worsening of memory problems. George could see it in Doris's eyes, the weariness, the frustration. Determined to help, George brought it up at the next Tanner's Diner gathering. Stanley, back on his feet, chimed in. Maybe we should all do a sleep challenge. No TV after 9, no caffeine after lunch, bedtime stretches. Leonard, the oldest of the group at 84, raised an eyebrow. I don't stretch, boys. If I drop something after 8 p.m., it belongs to the floor. Everyone laughed, but slowly they agreed to try it for a week. Doris promised no more coffee after 2 p.m. One short afternoon nap, no more than 20 minutes. A nightly walk with Mr. Whiskers. Turning off her phone by 8 p.m. George would check in and Buddy would keep them honest. By Friday, things had shifted. Doris reported feeling better. I'm still waking up at 3 a.m., she admitted, but I fall back asleep faster, and I'm less cranky. Haven't poured juice in my coffee all week. George grinned. That's progress. Stanley even admitted his own sleep was better without late-night sports highlights blaring. They weren't perfect. There were still bad nights. Doris still alphabetized her spices once. Leonard still refused to stretch. But something important had changed. They were talking about it. On Sunday, the group met at the park for a picnic. Doris brought homemade lemonade, decaf, and George brought Buddy, who promptly stole a sandwich. They talked about aches, pills, silly commercials, grandkids' bad knees, and sleep. It wasn't a medical breakthrough, but it was something better. Friendship, honesty, shared struggles, and a little humor. As Doris raised her glass, she smiled. To the best bunch of insomniacs I know. George clinked his lemonade against hers. To waking up and still having folks to wake up with. Buddy barked. Mr. Whiskers purred. The sun shone down on a group of older folks, learning to navigate life, one restless night at a time. There's a saying in Willow Creek, if you can bend down and pick up a quarter, you're younger than 70. Harold Richardson hadn't bent down in 3 years. Harold was 75 years old, a retired postman, and the proud owner of a 1965 red Mustang he kept spotless in his garage. He was tall, slightly hunched, with a booming laugh that made children jump and dogs bark. But Harold had a problem. 2 problems, actually. His knees. It all started about 5 years ago. One day I was walking Buddy, George's dog, you know, and my knees started making this weird crackling sound, Harold recalled, like crumpling a bag of chips. At first he ignored it. Just old bones, he figured. But soon, everyday things became a challenge. Climbing stairs, getting out of the car, bending down to tie his shoes, walking across the park without wincing. I used to jog, you know, Harold said proudly. Ran 2 miles a day in my 40s. Now it takes me 20 minutes just to get out of the recliner. The turning point came on a sunny Thursday at Willow Creek Park. The gang, George, Doris, Stanley, Leonard, and Olivia, had gathered for their weekly picnic. Harold, as always, arrived last, moving stiffly toward the wooden bench. As he attempted to sit down, his knees gave a loud pop, and he collapsed sideways onto Doris. "Mercy, Harold, you trying to sweep me off my feet?" Doris laughed, helping him up. Everyone chuckled, but Harold's face was tight with pain. "I think I'll just stand," he mumbled. But standing wasn't much better. His knees ached, throbbed, and crackled. Every step felt like walking on rusty hinges. Later that day, George brought it up to Olivia. "Is it normal for knees to hurt this much?" Olivia nodded. "Very. In fact, nearly 40% of adults over 65 experience significant knee pain." She explained it clearly. Cartilage, the smooth tissue that cushions your joints, wears down with age. Osteoarthritis, the most common joint disorder, affects more than 32 million Americans, especially seniors. Inflammation, loss of muscle strength, and old injuries make it worse. By 70, knees have basically seen it all, she said. Symptoms often include pain during activity, stiffness after sitting, swelling around the joint, cracking or popping sounds, difficulty climbing stairs or walking long distances. Factors include age, excess weight, prior injuries, genetics, sedentary. Lifestyle sounds like Harold, George muttered. That weekend, Olivia organized a casual knee-friendly fitness class at the park. She called it Move It or Lose It, which made Harold groan. Is there a stay still and nap class? He joked. But secretly he was curious. The class was simple, gentle leg stretches, seated knee lifts, easy squats against a wall, walking laps around the fountain. Doris wore bright pink sneakers. Leonard brought his walking stick, just in case. Stanley complained, but his wife had signed him up. Harold struggled at first. His knees cracked with every move. But surprisingly, by the third lap, the stiffness eased. Movement lubricates. Joints, Olivia explained. Think of your knees like old door hinges. The more they move, the better they feel. Harold, like many seniors, tried every home remedy he could find. Ice packs, heating pads, over-the-counter pain creams, Epsom salt soaks. He even bought a pair of copper-infused compression sleeves after seeing a late-night infomercial. Waste of $29.99, he admitted. Only thing it improved was my mailman's delivery schedule. But Olivia pointed out some science-backed tips: low-impact exercise, walking, swimming, cycling, maintaining a healthy weight to reduce knee pressure, anti-inflammatory foods like salmon, leafy greens and berries, physical therapy and strength training for leg muscles, proper footwear with good arch support, vitamin D and calcium supplements. Don't skip your checkups either, she added. Osteoarthritis isn't curable, but it can be managed. After a few weeks of sticking with the gentle exercise routine, Harold noticed changes. I still creak, he joked, but now it's more like an old rocking chair than a busted seesaw. He could walk farther. He could climb the steps at Tanner's diner without leaning on Doris. He even bent down, carefully, to tie his shoes. The group celebrated by buying him a new pair of sneakers. Bright blue, with extra padding. Because you're fasters. Lightning now, Doris teased. Harold realized it wasn't just about knees, it was about taking control. The pain made me feel old, he admitted to George one afternoon. Like my life was shrinking, one stiff joint at a time. But moving, laughing, being with you all, it makes me feel human again. George nodded. Pain tries to make us smaller, friends make us bigger. At the next diner meetup, Harold stood up slowly but without wincing and announced his new personal wisdom. Keep moving, even if it's slow, even if it's ugly, move. 2. Laugh at yourself. Nothing cracks louder than my knees, except my jokes. 3. Don't believe every infomercial. Copper sleeves won't turn you into an athlete. Listen to smart people, especially ones named Olivia. Never sit on a wobbly bench. Trust me on this one. Everyone applauded. Even Leonard grinned. I still won't stretch, he mumbled. Pain would come and go. Some days would be harder than others, but as long as they had each other, to laugh, to move, to complain, to cheer, they'd keep walking, stiff knees and all. Harold raised his lemonade. To knees that still carry us, no matter how creaky. And the Willow Creek gang toasted with lemonade and laughter under a sky that felt just a little kinder that afternoon. It was a mild Saturday afternoon when Stanley decided he needed a heart checkup. You know, Stanley said to the gang, I've been feeling a bit off. My chest feels heavy sometimes, and I'm always winded after a few laps around the park. Maybe I should get checked. Can't be too careful. George, always the pragmatic one, squinted. I don't know, Stan. You've been out of breath ever, Since Doris taught you to use a blender last year. Stanley waved his hand dismissively. Ha ha, very funny. But seriously, I think it's time. Stanley was 72 years old, retired from running the local hardware store, and a man of routine. But his routine had recently taken a detour. The heavy breathing had started subtly, a huff after climbing a flight of stairs, a pause to catch his breath after lifting the grocery bags. Lately, walking across the park seemed more like a marathon than a stroll. His friends at Willow Creek Park weren't doctors, but they were experts in talking about health issues. As Stanley and the gang sat down under the shade of the old oak tree, Olivia chimed in with her usual calm wisdom. Stanley, it's good that you're paying attention to your body. Many people ignore symptoms like that, but heart disease is the #1 cause of death for adults over 65. So, it's important to keep an eye on things. Stanley looked puzzled. I've always been healthy. I don't smoke, I don't drink too much, and I eat all those green veggies, George scoffed. Stanley, you once called kale the devil's lettuce. Stanley grinned. Fine, I'm not perfect, but I've got to be doing something right? Olivia continued. Stanley, it's not just about what we eat or whether we smoke. Our heart health depends on many factors: genetics, activity level, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, and even stress. The older we get, the more important it is to listen to our bodies. Let's break it down, Stanley, Olivia said. Ever the teacher. What are the main signs of heart issues in older adults? Well, chest pain, I'd assume, Stanley muttered, rubbing his chest. Fatigue, feeling short of breath, dizziness, and swelling in the legs or ankles. That's right, Olivia nodded. Older adults often experience more subtle signs of heart disease, like feeling winded during activities, getting tired easily, or noticing that your legs swell up by the end of the day. I thought that was just from sitting too much, Stanley said, laughing nervously. Well, that's part of it, Olivia explained. Sitting too long can raise your risk for heart problems, especially if it leads to a lack of exercise. Or weight gain. The next day, Stanley booked his appointment with his doctor. The results came back in a way that surprised him. I've got high blood pressure? Stanley asked the doctor in disbelief. Not just that, the doctor said, with a serious look on his face. Your cholesterol levels are a bit high, and you've got some early signs of atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries. This means your heart is working harder than it should be. Stanley's face paled. What does that mean? Can I still have a steak every once in a while? The doctor smiled, trying to keep things light. Moderation is key, Stanley, but the real focus should be on changing your lifestyle, eating better, moving more, and managing stress. When Stanley returned to the park the next week, he had a new sense of purpose. His friends immediately noticed something different about him. You look lighter on your feet, Doris observed. What's your secret, Stan? Well, I'm cutting back on red meat and making better choices, Stanley said. More fish, more veggies, and I've started walking a little more each day. You've always liked the couch, though, George joked. Don't expect me to keep up with you. Stanley smiled, feeling a bit more proud than usual. He'd signed up for a heart-healthy challenge, not just for himself, but for the whole group. Stanley announced his idea for a heart race, a friendly competition in Willow Creek Park. The goal is simple: move more, feel better, and maybe even lose a few pounds along the way. Everyone was skeptical at first. Stanley, I don't think any of us are running marathons, George said, laughing, but soon the challenge took off. Each member of the group committed to walking at least 30 minutes a day for the next month. Some went above and beyond. Doris started going on daily walks with Buddy, her neighbor's dog. Leonard took the stairs 2 at a time. Olivia began stretching more regularly. And Stanley? Stanley turned out to be the biggest cheerleader of all. As the weeks went on, the group noticed changes. For the first time in months, Stanley wasn't winded after walking across the park. Doris no longer needed her afternoon nap. Leonard stopped, complaining about his knees. Olivia explained to the group why they were all feeling better. Exercise does wonders for our heart health, she said. It lowers blood pressure, helps control cholesterol levels, improves circulation, and reduces stress. It doesn't matter if it's a 15-minute walk or a full workout, just moving makes a huge difference. Stanley, grinning, added, I can actually breathe when I climb the stairs now, and I'm down 5 pounds. The group agreed that stress was also a big factor in heart health. Stanley, you're the master of stress, Doris teased. You've got the whole park worrying about your heart, but have you tried relaxation techniques, meditation, yoga, or just taking time to breathe? Stanley raised an eyebrow. Do you mean like when I watch Jeopardy? Olivia nodded. Exactly. It's important to manage stress. Deep breathing exercises, meditation, and mindful relaxation can help lower your heart rate and reduce your risk for heart disease. As the weeks passed, the Willow Creek gang also realized that eating for heart health wasn't as bad as they thought. I've been eating more fish, Stanley admitted, but I never thought I'd enjoy salmon as much as I do. Just wait until we have baked chicken with a side of kale, Doris said with a wink. Stanley groaned. Now, that sounds like torture. But despite the jokes, everyone agreed that eating healthy and exercising more was making a difference. Stanley's story became a reminder for everyone at Willow Creek. Your heart is a lifelong companion. The more you take care of it, the longer it'll be there, ready to help you enjoy the good things in life. Whether it's a walk in the park, a friendly chat with old friends, or just another year of living well. It was another peaceful morning at Willow Creek Park when Stanley noticed something strange. As he bent down to tie his shoes, a sudden sharp pain shot up from his knees and into his thighs. He winced and straightened up, hoping it was just a temporary discomfort. Stanley, you look like you're doing the Macarena with your knees, George said, leaning against the park bench. You all right? Stanley grimaced, but gave a thumbs up. Yeah, I'm fine, just had a little knee moment, that's all. But as the day wore on, Stanley couldn't shake the feeling that his body wasn't quite the same. The occasional stiffness in his joints had become more frequent. Climbing stairs was becoming more challenging, even standing up after sitting. For a while was followed by an uncomfortable grunt. Maybe it's just the weather, he muttered. But deep down, he knew that his arthritis was probably starting to make its presence known. The next morning, Olivia sat with the group in their usual spot under the oak tree. She noticed Stanley rubbing his knees again, clearly uncomfortable. Stanley, what's going on with you today? Olivia asked with concern. Are you feeling all right? Stanley paused, then sighed. You know, Olivia, I think I've been dealing with a little more pain in my joints lately. My knees hurt when I walk, and my lower back has been stiff. I think it might be arthritis, Olivia nodded. It sounds like you might be dealing with something many older adults face. Osteoarthritis. It's one of the most common forms of arthritis, especially after 60. Everyone gathered around, intrigued. Stanley, Doris asked, what exactly is arthritis? Is it just old age stuff? Olivia smiled and took the floor. Not exactly, Doris. Arthritis is a condition that affects your joints, causing pain, swelling, and stiffness. Osteoarthritis happens when the cartilage between the bones breaks down, leading to painful friction. It commonly affects joints like the knees, hips, and spine. Ah, so it's like my bones are getting rough with each other, Stanley said, half laughing. Great, I've got grumpy bones now. Olivia chuckled. Not quite that dramatic, Stanley. But yeah, when the cartilage in our joints breaks down over time, it causes wear and tear on the bones. That's why many older adults start feeling stiffer or experience more pain in the joints. Sounds like the kind of thing I can just push through, Stanley replied. Well, not exactly, Olivia said, shaking her head. While it's tempting to ignore joint pain, it's important to take action. If left untreated, arthritis can lead to decreased mobility and even disability. The good news is there are plenty of things you can do to manage it, starting with exercise, diet, and other lifestyle changes. Exercise? For arthritis? George said skeptically, raising an eyebrow. Stanley, you've been talking about walking more already. Do you really think walking is going to help with your bones? Olivia smiled. Actually, yes. Low-impact exercise like walking, swimming, or cycling can strengthen muscles around the joints and improve flexibility. It may not fix the arthritis, but it can help reduce pain and stiffness. Stanley thought about this for a moment. Well, I can certainly walk. I've been doing it more, especially with the heart race challenge. That's right, Olivia continued, and now you can start focusing on stretching and strengthening exercises. That's crucial for bone health. If your muscles are strong, they'll take some of the pressure off your joints. Doris, ever the foodie, asked, "What about food? Is there anything I can eat to help with my bones?" Olivia nodded. Absolutely. Calcium and vitamin D are key for bone health. Calcium helps strengthen bones, and vitamin D helps your body absorb calcium. You can get calcium from dairy products, leafy greens like kale, and fortified foods. Vitamin D can be found in fatty fish, fortified milk, and of course, from spending a little time in the sun. Wait, so you're telling me I need to eat kale again? Stanley groaned. Olivia laughed. Well, yes, kale is a good source of calcium. But if you're not a fan of it, there are plenty of other options. You can even take supplements if necessary. The key is to make sure you're getting enough of both calcium and vitamin D to maintain strong bones. Stanley nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. I guess I'll have to check my diet and maybe start taking some of those supplements. George, who had been quiet for a moment, chimed in. Stanley, how about stress? I've noticed that you seem a little more tense than usual. Could stress be making your pain worse? Olivia nodded. Absolutely. Stress can increase inflammation in the body, which may exacerbate joint pain. So it's important to find ways to relax. Meditation, yoga, and deep breathing exercises can help lower stress levels, which can reduce pain and improve your overall well-being. Stanley groaned in mock despair. Great, so I'm supposed to take yoga classes now too? Olivia chuckled. Well, you don't have to, but even simple stretching and deep breathing can help. And don't forget that laughter is also a great stress reliever. With Olivia's advice in mind, Stanley and the group decided to take on a new challenge, the Bone-Friendly Challenge. They agreed to incorporate joint-friendly exercises into their daily routines and focus on improving their diets. For the next month, they committed to walking for at least 30 minutes each day, incorporating more calcium-rich foods into their diets, practicing gentle stretching and breathing exercises. Each week, they'd meet at Willow Creek Park to check in on their progress, share tips, and of course, laugh at each other's attempts to stay active. I don't care how old I get. George said with a grin. I'm not going to be outdone by Stanley when it comes to staying healthy. Stanley laughed. Well, I'm just trying to keep up with you all. Besides, I've got to be in good shape to keep up with all the walking we're doing. After a few weeks, everyone noticed significant improvements. Stanley's knees weren't as stiff, and he was walking faster and more comfortably. Doris found that her back pain had lessened, and Leonard wasn't complaining. About his hips nearly as much. Olivia summed it up best. The key to managing arthritis and maintaining joint health is staying active. It helps keep the muscles around the joints strong, which reduces pain and improves mobility. It's never too late to start. Stanley, beaming with pride, added, I've learned that I don't have to let arthritis stop me. With the right changes, I'm not just living with it, I'm thriving. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and a healthier outlook, the gang at Willow Creek continued to walk, laugh, and grow stronger together. It was a warm afternoon at Willow Creek Park. The leaves were turning golden, and the air had that crisp feeling that comes with the approach of fall. Stanley, Olivia, Doris, George, and Leonard sat on their usual bench under the oak tree. They had just finished their daily walk, and everyone was in high spirits. Stanley stretched his arms and sighed contentedly. You know, I never thought I'd be saying this, but I'm actually enjoying these walks. And my knees, they don't hurt nearly as much as they did a month ago. And Doris, ever the skeptic, chuckled. I still can't believe you're saying that, Stanley. I thought you were going to be the one complaining about every ache in your body. Well, you were right about one thing, Doris. Stanley grinned. These changes have really made a difference. I feel better than I have in years. Olivia, always the encourager, smiled at the group. It's amazing what consistent effort can do, isn't it? A little exercise, some better food choices, and learning how to manage stress. It can go a long way in improving our health. As the group shared stories of their progress, Olivia turned the conversation toward the importance of consistency in maintaining their bone health. Stanley, Doris, Leonard, all of you have shown incredible dedication over the past month. This isn't just about a quick fix for arthritis or pain. It's about creating long-lasting habits that will benefit you in the years to come. George, who had been unusually quiet, nodded thoughtfully. I'll admit, I didn't think much of all these bone exercises at first, but I see now that it's not just about avoiding pain, it's about living better. I've got more energy, I'm sleeping better, and I even feel less moody. That's the thing, Olivia continued. Bone health is just one part of a bigger picture. When we take care of our bodies, everything benefits. Strong bones, strong muscles, and healthy joints give us the freedom to do the things we love, whether that's hiking, gardening, or simply walking through the park. The group exchanged knowing looks, realizing just how far they had come. Leonard spoke up. Honestly, I used to think that as we get older, we just have to accept pain and limitations. I thought we were all just waiting for the next part of our bodies to fall apart. But now, I see that small changes can lead to big results. Olivia nodded. That's the truth, Leonard. It's about making adjustments that are manageable for us, ones that we can stick with. Whether it's adding a few extra steps to your walk, choosing a healthier meal option, or even practicing deep breathing to reduce stress, it all adds up. Stanley, reflecting on his own journey, spoke up. I can honestly say that I feel like I've got more control over my health now. I'm not waiting for something bad to happen. Instead, I'm taking action to prevent it from happening. Olivia beamed. Exactly. The earlier we start taking care of our bones and joints, the better our chances are of avoiding serious pain and even disability later on. Prevention is so much more powerful than waiting until things get worse. George, who had previously been the most skeptical of all, gave a small chuckle. Well, if anyone had told me that I'd be doing yoga stretches at my age, I would have laughed. But now, I actually feel more flexible. And who knew that hydration plays such a role in keeping my joints lubricated? Olivia laughed along with him. It's the small things, George. Sometimes we forget how basic habits can have a huge impact on our health. As the conversation continued, Olivia noticed the light in everyone's eyes. It wasn't just the satisfaction of seeing results, but a deeper sense of empowerment. You've all built a foundation for long-term health, she said. The changes you've made will not only benefit you, but they'll also set an example for others. You're showing your families, your neighbors, and even strangers at Willow Creek Park that getting older doesn't mean giving up on life or living with pain. Stanley nodded. You know, I never thought much about legacy before. I always thought it was something left to the younger generations. But now, I see that we can leave a legacy of health, vitality, and resilience. Leonard smiled. I like that. A health legacy. Not just the memories of good times, but a lifestyle that encourages others to stay healthy and active too. Olivia smiled warmly at the group. That's exactly it. A legacy of health can spread across generations. And who knows? Maybe the kids in the park will grow up seeing us and think, I want to be just like them when I'm older. You never know the impact your actions can have. As the group got ready to leave the park, Stanley had one final thought to share. You know, Olivia, when we started this, I thought it was going to be a lot of work, but now I realize it's not about perfection, it's about progress. And the fact that we've come this far, and we're still going, feels like a big win. Olivia nodded. Exactly, Stanley. Progress is what matters. The important thing is that you're all committed to your health. And as long as you keep moving forward, no matter how slow or small the steps, you'll continue to see the benefits. It's about consistency and perseverance. Doris, ever the optimist, added with a grin, and who says getting old? Oh, it can't be fun. Look at us. We're a bunch of healthy, spunky seniors. Everyone laughed, and for a moment, the worries of aging seemed a little lighter, a little easier to bear. Together, they had found a new way forward, a way that included health, laughter, and the kind of community that made life better, no matter how many birthdays had passed.